Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the second VDI Summit edition. As I've been told today, we have a record of participants, so thank you for joining and for being here. My name is Axel Leguet, and I will be your moderator. We have a fantastic list of speakers today. The first one will be Rosanna Currer. She's the co-founder of Cyber Wayfinder. Then we'll have Professor Bart Prenel. He's a full professor at KU Leuven here in Belgium. And then we will finish with Melanie Ryback, who is CEO from Radical Open Security. So you'll have the opportunity to hear those people, to ask questions to those people, and they will answer your questions, of course. This is a picture of me, and today you can see me in my teenager room, so sorry about the background, but sometimes we have no choice about this. So what's the situation with respect to AI and cybersecurity? Actually, we are building a new fantastic world in where digitalization and artificial intelligence, they really help and try to ease the life of citizens. And we see this in many situations, like, for example, energy communities, in where prediction and digitalization will help people to share energy and so saving energy and do good things for our planet. We also see this in the medical sector, in where artificial intelligence will predict the disease of tomorrow, and digitalization will help us to monitor the status of people and let them home, so they will not need to go to hospital when things are difficult. And of course, we see this in smart cities. There are sensors everywhere. We have prediction about traffic. We have prediction about pollution. So all this is for the good sake of humanities. But unfortunately, this new world is not yet cyber secured. And there's a huge, what we call in my world, attack surface. That is a huge opportunity for people to attack this new good world and destroy it. In fact, the number of possibilities to attack this world is as vast as the number of connections that we have and the number of users that is increasing all the time. So this is problematic because we know that many people, and we call them the hackers, may take advantage of this. We have a dream, of course, and the dream will be that citizens and workers are aware of this situation when they design the system. In this good world, cybersecurity will be integrated in the value chain. Your data will be protected, so no one will be able to blackmail you, to steal your identity or your data. And of course, all the product, all the digital product that you will be using, they will be not only safe, but also secured, in the sense that no malicious action could be used, for example, to block the usage of those products. This is our dream. But we are also facing a true reality. And the reality is a bit disappointing. There is a clear lack of cyber knowledge by the actor of the management process. Many people do not know what to do with cybersecurity. We have a lack of security in products developed by the stakeholders. And there is a tendency to believe that products that are not cybersecurity products should not be secured, while actually the digital world should be entirely secured. We have a lack of transparency in case of cyber incident. This is also problematic. We have many companies that get hacked and they do not say it. And by having this, let's say, protective attitude, they do not protect others because they do not reveal the incident. In general, we have in fact what we call a lack of knowledge about the benefits of cybersecurity. There are, I will say, unfounded reasons for this. The first of them is it's a claim. It's a general claim that we hear quite a lot. Cybersecurity is too expensive. Many people say that they should not include cybersecurity in their production process, especially small companies, because it seems that it costs money. What I can tell them is that each time you play the game and you lose the game because you are the victim of an attack, you are going to lose more money than if you had introduced some cybersecurity in your management process. Some other people claim that cybersecurity is blocking. That is basically there are many things they can do in the case that they would include cybersecurity in their process. It's actually a false argument, and in fact, we have many European regulations that are forcing people to get a cybersecurity secure environment. So this blocking situation could actually be the counterpart. If you are not cyber secure, your system could be blocked, but not the opposite. Some people also say cybersecurity is not needed because they do not build digital tools. For example, they build sensor or other things, so they believe it's not digital. But the simple fact that they're using computers in their company brings cybersecurity problems into the picture. And so this requires, of course, to have cybersecurity responses to this. Some people also say that there are no competencies in Belgium, so even if they would want to do something about cybersecurity, there will not be any possibility for doing it. This is, of course, fake, and you will see today that we have many people that are competent and working in this area. But maybe what we need to do is to get a bit more connected, so having more coordination, and I think that would be one of the main objectives of today. So how to change this situation, or to have a better perception of cybersecurity? The answer is classical, very simple. Train people and improve skills. We need to improve knowledge about what cybersecurity is and why do we need to do this. And of course, this goes with awareness. We need to get people aware of the situation. Of course, to our specialists, we also need to do excellent research and team up about this. So this means basically that we need those three things. And today we will have 3 speakers talking about those 3 topics. And now I'm going to hand the floor to Rosanna Currer from Cyber Wayfinder. She will be the first one talking about upscaling. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Axel, for your presentation, and thank you for having me here in the virtual VDI Summit. So I'll be talking about cybersecurity upskilling and how we can promote innovation through diversity and inclusion. This is a topic that's really close to my heart, and I'd like to talk to you about the business case for diversity and inclusion, especially in cybersecurity. So what am I going to talk about today? And this is basically my agenda. So I'll tell you about my why. Why do I do this? And why do I love cybersecurity? What are the roadblocks of cybersecurity? And who do we call? I think I like what Axel said. We do have a lot of competencies here in Belgium. And these people who we call, what gives them headaches? And this is something that we should all address and be aware of. But I have a turning point. Instead of just talking about all the problems, I'd like to also focus on what we can do and how we innovate. So these are the points that I'd like to talk about today. Let me start with what is our why, what brings you joy. And I think there are a lot of people who love technology, who are present in this summit. And for me, really, it's the joy of technology. I'd love to see us having conveniences like self-driving cars, and just the fact that we can video conferences, that we could even survive a pandemic and still have our businesses going on and our work life not at a complete standstill. So for me, it's the joy of technology and the conveniences it brings. So that is my why. But there are roadblocks to these technologies, and it's not really innovation. It's actually insecurity, where we can't go forward. We have the technology. We know how we can improve society, but these tools are highly insecure. So there are a lot of horror stories about cybercrime costing more and more every year, and the forecast is $10.5 trillion by 2025. And there's a lack of transparency. So we actually don't really know. And this is all our figures are probably undercounted. And then there are more scary stories like the Internet of Vulnerable Things. There's going to be a lot of data coming in once we have the Internet of Things installed. We have appliances. We have our cars, our computers on wheels. And all our appliances and the things that we use, they will all have computers in them. And of course, in these computers are the vulnerabilities that come with it. So these are a lot of scary stories. And of course, they say that our businesses are actually also getting more and more complex. We have our partnerships that our companies have with other organizations, and also the supply chain. There's the software supply chain that is giving a lot of our organizations headaches at the moment. So, there's a lot more complexity when we start understanding how trade happens in the whole world. So who do we call Ghostbusters? It's our security teams, and our security teams are more and more having the role of firefighters. And this is something that unfortunately is we have a lot of competencies, but also we also have to add more people into the field with more skills, so that we can not only do firefighting but also prevention, or do deterrent actions to even discourage hackers from attacking our companies or our organizations. So what gives our security teams headaches? And Axel already touched upon this, is like the gap that we have in our talent and in the industry. We don't have enough people working in a field, and it's not because there's a lack of talent. I'm sorry, it's not really a lack of talent, but I would say it's just a lack of coordination. Just as Axel was mentioning, we have the talent. We just need to know how to train them, where to train them, and where to place them once they are trained. And you see that globally, we have more than 2 million lack of, they say, skills in the industry. So this is a real headache for the people working in our security teams. So what can we do? If you go to a lot of cybersecurity conferences, sometimes a topic that I see is increasing over the years is a topic of burnout. So this is really a red flag for our industry. We do need talent and new skills coming into our industry. So how do we start? I would say we start with understanding why the challenge is there. So to quote Dr. Edward Humphrey, who is a working group at ISO, the worldwide shortage of skilled cyber personnel has a direct and significant impact on organizations and their ability to protect themselves. So understanding how this challenge and how important this challenge is will help us even innovate when we come to the solutions. And so we at Cyber Wayfinder, we have a solution, and our solution is diversity and inclusion. So the answer is to find what is our low-hanging fruit, those people that can get up and running and joining our teams in less than a year. How do we upskill them, not as individuals, but as a team? So what we mean is that we see teams and we improve the quality of hire, not per individual, but thinking already of teams. So I'm working a little bit on a small research project of mine, and I've presented it in a few conferences. How do we measure the power of diversity in cybersecurity teams to really push the business case for diversity and inclusion? So our challenge is to create effective teams. So in a knowledge economy, we have right now, it's teams who innovate and not the individual. So keep this in mind. So how do we innovate? So we use teams, but also we have to know, how do we create these teams? So I would say we need a shift in a mindset from a measuring stick, how we measure skills and abilities, to a toolbox model. So a measuring stick is the emphasis is on the individual skills and the high ability people, versus a toolbox model where we think of teams. We have to think, what are the abilities within a team? How do we supplement the skills? And what are the particular skills gap in our team? So sometimes we have teams where they all have varying degrees of competency in the same skill. So putting in another person, with a different skill could actually vastly increase the performance of that team. And that is what I call the toolbox model. And this toolbox model is really based on creating the perfect, or at least the ideal cognitive repertoire that you need to face the challenges that the teams will have to face, given their objectives. And given, of course, like what Axel was saying, the attack surfaces we are now facing as organizations. So about diversity, I always like to say, and this is a quote also from one of the professors from who's working on the diversity bonus. He's a professor of complexity and economics at the University of Michigan. And I like this quote where he says, organizations that add diversity indiscriminately, so just to create a good statistics, to reach targets and benchmarks, will also be disappointed. So you have to, when you add diversity, it shouldn't be indiscriminately. It should be targeted. You have to know why this diversity will add value to the team. So the first thing I'd like you to think about is when you're a team, and I think most people have had worked in good teams and in bad teams. And when you think about it, a team starts with objectives or challenges, and these challenges will have to be answered by a series of tasks. Okay, these are the tasks we need to complete in order to meet our challenges and objectives. And like I was saying, in a knowledge economy with such complexity, like our organizations are working with so many partners and third-party service providers, more and more of these tasks are becoming what we call non-routine tasks, so tasks that do not look the same every day. So diversity bonus, or this business case where diversity adds value to a team, is more significant on complex tasks. And this is what we have in a knowledge economy. So on complex tasks, no single person's repertoire will be sufficient. And that's why I say innovation will be coming from teams that are diverse. And this is a mind map that I got from the internet on the cybersecurity domains. And you can see, if you look at it, you have domains such as laws and regulations, you have something like risk assessment, you have physical security, you have the competency of framework and standards. There are a lot of directives and regulations coming out of the EU. There's threat intelligence, there's education, there's security operation, very, very important, security architecture, and also career development. You want your people in your teams to be happy and to know that they are growing in their roles. So you can see that cybersecurity is such a broad field that needs a lot of competencies beyond just technology. So keep this mind map in your mind, and think about, okay, you start with your challenges, and you saw the challenges, right? And then now you have your skills. Okay, these are the skills I have to do. And you see, okay, these are non-routine skills, non-routine tasks, and they should be met with a diversity, what I call a cognitive diverse skill set. So what are the skills needed? Well, that's why I talk about a cognitive repertoire of a team. So not single individual abilities. It's not like, if I can get this high ability person into my team, we'll be a great team. Actually, a team with only one high ability person could probably be not as effective as a team where a lot of medium ability people are in the team, but with different varying cognitive skills. So that's why I think upskilling in cybersecurity is our low-hanging fruit, because there are a lot of people coming from other competencies, let's say marketing, psychology, finance, that have excellent transferable skills that we need in the industry. And what we need to teach these people, these fellow future colleagues, is that we have to teach them the language and the different domains and just how cybersecurity works. And they will bring in their transferable skills that we direly need in the industry. So this is just to show you why a cognitive repertoire is very important. In a knowledge economy, if you can see in this graph that in the last few decades, the dotted line has been increasing. And this dotted line represents cognitive and non-routine cognitive work. So if you see, for example, in the lower left-hand corner where we have manual routine work, that's like an assembly line worker. But if you go one above, then you have cognitive routine. So it's still routine, but it's not manual, it's cognitive. It's like data entry. And on the right-hand side of manual routine is manual non-routine. So every day your tasks are different, but still it relies on manual actions and activities. And on the top right hand side, that is where you have the cognitive non-routine. It's not manual, it requires cognitive skills, and it's not routine. So every day you're faced with different challenges, or every week you're faced with different challenges. And I argue this, in our knowledge economy, is the kind of skills we need, the kind of work that faces us, but also we need this cognitive repertoire of teams that can handle the different challenges on a daily basis. So now I start a poll, and I'd like to know what you think. What do you think is the top attribute sought in a cybersecurity professional? And this is a result of a survey of ISC Square, so it's the biggest professional organization of cybersecurity. And the answers are: 1, relevant IT work experience; 2, strong problem-solving abilities; 3, cybersecurity certifications; 4, relevant cybersecurity work experience; and 5, curiosity and eagerness to learn. So I'll give you 5 seconds to answer this poll, and I think that we will have a nice discussion on what the real answers are. So I'll count to 5 in my head. Okay, so I hope that we have enough people answering on the poll. I see that we have, I think we have enough answers. Okay, so I'm going to read out the answers. The answer for number 1 is curiosity and eagerness to learn. Number 2, strong problem-solving abilities. Number 3 is relevant cybersecurity work experience, and the 4th is certification. So this is the answer of what you all the poll. These are the results of the poll. So number 1 is curiosity and eagerness to learn. So let's see what the real answer is. So in a knowledge economy, the number 1 skill that the cybersecurity personnel or colleagues are looking for in future colleagues is actually strong problem-solving abilities. So that's 38%. But second to that is curiosity and eager to learn. So you were not far off. So this group was actually quite good. And then you see certification is not far behind. It's also a second attribute. And along with strong communication skills, we really need this in the tech industry. And I cannot emphasize this. And when you look at strong knowledge of basic cybersecurity concepts, it's really actually down below, and even knowledge of advanced cybersecurity. Although you do need cybersecurity certification. So that is how the industry answered this survey. And like I said, you guys were actually quite close to that. But number 1 is strong problem-solving abilities. So how do we create this? How do we make this possible? So there is what I talked about already, knowing your objectives, define your tasks that can meet these objectives, and see, are they non-routine? Are they routine tasks? Are they cognitive? Are they manual? And then to meet these tasks, what are the skills that we are needed? But to make these 2 steps actionable is we actually have to promote a culture that enables successful interaction. So even if you have a good team, theoretically, with a great cognitive repertoire, if there are no successful interactions between your team members, then you cannot be successful. So you have to learn to actually put value in the differences of insights that people with different cognitive skills will bring into the table. Okay, so I'm nearing the end of my presentation. So my call to action is, when you are hiring or you're thinking of joining a team, think about, will your skills benefit that team? And how can we make a diverse team work? So which skill sets are we lacking in our teams? And it doesn't have to be always technology. So you have to think of, there's the technology side, the business side, the legal side, the communication side, and also the human factor side. And knowledge and experience are dynamic qualifications. So again, to quote Scott E. Page, the fact that the person can know fewer but different tools means that someone can have less measured ability than the people already in a group, but still contribute just because they have that skill that nobody else in the team has. And it helps them meet their objectives. So thank you so much. That's me. So reach out if you have any questions or any other things that you want to know. I'm going to just give a quick key takeaway of what I had covered in my presentation. And just remember that in a knowledge economy, teams innovate. It's not individuals, it's teams. In order to improve the quality of hire, think of how you can have an engaged team, a high-performing team. Identify what your objectives are, what kind of tasks they are. Are they cognitive, manual, routine, non-routine? What skills you need to fulfill these tasks, and think about your team as having the perfect cognitive repertoire to actually meet these challenges. And hire for diversity if the need is identified only, and if you know that you can promote the right culture to maximize this diversity. And remember, knowledge and experience are dynamic qualifications. It's mindset and attitude that are less dynamic. So these are my key takeaways. And with this, I pass you on to Professor Bart Preneel. And thank you so much for your patience and your attention.
Thank you, Rosanna, and thank you all for attending. It's a great honor and pleasure to be part of this lineup. I'm very happy to be with you. And today I want to talk about security and privacy for AI and what we as security and privacy experts and researchers can do for you to make AI more secure and more private. Previous speakers have already spoken about developments in technology. We have now great computing capabilities. We have computers everywhere, which is known as the IoT, or the Internet of Things. And about 10 years ago, you see the graph on the left, it was promised that by 2020, we would have 50 billion devices connected to the Internet. Now, we know that was a bit optimistic, but in technology, we always want to see hockey sticks. So the numbers on the right are closer to reality. So today, for 2022, there is about 16 billion devices expected on the Internet of Things, and about 10 billion classical devices. So in total, we have about 26 billion. And as you see, the curve keeps growing, not as fast as anticipated, but probably in about 10 years, we'll hit the 50 billion devices on the Internet. Now, the goal, of course, is not to have devices on the Internet, more and more computers everywhere. We also have to look what we can do with them. Several speakers mentioned already the example of cars, where we put a lot of sensors and computers, and so we hope that cars will become self-driving. We put computers everywhere in our homes. Many of us have already several dozen devices in our home that are intelligent, and some of them are not smartphones or computers, but are actually built-in thermostats, automated systems for the windows and so on, for the garage door openers. So everything becomes more and more automated. The same thing happens in our buildings and at a larger scale in our cities. So we create massive amounts of data. We interconnect all these computers over networks, and then we store this data. But of course, what we really want to do is to get value out of this data. And this is clearly too much value to just have humans look at it and analyze it. So we actually need intelligent algorithms, AI, to get value out of data. And this is where AI can help make society a better place. It's a smart way to process the massive amount of data generated by all these computers we put everywhere. Now, of course, once you create a value in a society, there is also risks. there is some forces that want to go after this, that want to take money or that want to disrupt what we want to create. And so we actually have to install defenses for this. We have to use cybersecurity technologies to defend this ecosystem against malicious parties. A good example for this is the cloud, because in the end, all of those data we produce end up in the cloud. And you see as examples here a lot of more social data, Web 2, but of course also the IoT devices collect data in the cloud. And I guess important to remember there is that the cloud is someone else's computer. And I do agree that the average cloud is probably more secure than the average server in a company. But on the other hand, it turns out that data in the cloud is a very attractive target. Because there is massive amounts of data in the cloud, it also actually forms a target of massive attacks. And we see this when we look at this website, which I really recommend you visiting, on World's Biggest Data Breaches. It's part of a website called Information is Beautiful. But this page is not so beautiful in the sense that it shows us the size of data breaches. So the bigger the bubble, the bigger the data breach. And so as you can see, the bubbles you see here from the last couple of years, and they don't get smaller, are hundreds of millions of people whose data has been breached. Some of it is government data, some of it is health data, some of it, of course, is also social media data. So it's pretty shocking that even if we have GDPR and even if we try to build more secure systems, that if you scroll down, in fact, in the past things were bad, but even having GDPR and having better defenses, in fact, situation gets worse because we collect more and more data and the bubbles get bigger and bigger. So we do seem to have a challenge in society. We collect more and more data, but we have problems defending it. Now, one thing we see in cybersecurity is that actually we use more and more AI to also defend systems. So AI becomes a tool to detect malware, to detect aberrant behavior, to detect attacks. So in that sense, AI can help us. Unfortunately, also on the other side, the bad guys are also using AI to conceive better attacks. And so more or less what we're going to see in the next decade is the war of AI systems, where the defenders will deploy AI systems to better defend this complex ecosystem. And on the other hand, attackers will use AI to attack it. And I think we'll see very interesting times. Today, I wanted to speak about a different aspect of this, or different metal of the coin. So on the one hand, you have AI helping cybersecurity and privacy in attacks and defenses. And the other part of the medal is that actually AI systems themselves are the target of attacks. And there actually are systems where decisions are being made, so they become a very attractive target of attacks. And I think we start understanding better and better that we have to improve the security and privacy protection of the AI systems themselves. Let's take an example to focus our thoughts. Autonomous vehicles. So you may remember that about 7 years ago, we were all promised self-driving cars by 2021. Unfortunately, it's now 2022, and we still don't have fully self-driving cars. And the message is now it's going to take another decade before that will really take off. But we do, of course, see progress, and the cars get more and more intelligent. And of course, there is more and more models on the market with increasing features. These features are based, of course, on a lot of computers in the car that are fed by cameras and sensors. These computers analyze the data from those cameras and sensors with complex software systems. And of course, if a car has to take a task, such as recognizing a traffic sign or making a decision whether or not a pedestrian will cross the road, has to make very quick decisions, decisions will be made in the car. You can't upload the picture to the cloud and then wait until the answer comes. That would be too slow. So you have actually machine learning and decision processes inside the car to detect lanes and objects, to recognize traffic signs, and to also plan and control and to optimize, for example, fuel consumption. So that's the decision made in the car. On the other side, on the other hand, the car will also upload the data to the cloud, and there the machine learning models will be retrained and improved, and then the car will get improved models so that next time they will take better decisions. So this is more or less a huge and complex ecosystem where we have local decisions in the car and then a more globally trained system based on the data of, in the future, millions or even billions of cars. It's not a surprise that this forms a very interesting target for attack. So if you want to actually threaten people or damage an economy, up to date we witness a lot of ransomware where people manage or threaten to encrypt our files and ask for money to get the keys to decrypt them. You can imagine that it becomes very interesting to actually attack a car and to encrypt information on the car and say, if you want your car back, you have to pay a ransom fee. And of course, also in the broader picture, if you're looking at cyber war, unfortunately, I believe that infrastructure such as cars will become part of the cyber war scenario. So what we have to do is, of course, when we look at this ecosystem, we have to secure it properly. We have to have secure communications, which is something that's seen as a solved problem today. We know how to do this quite efficiently. We have to protect upgrade paths. So every time the car gets a new version, it has to be secure. We have to make sure that nobody can insert a malicious update. So some advanced car models have this already today, but just like our smartphone gets several updates per week, in a few years' time, our car will get updates per week. That's not only the machine learning model, but the general software of the car as well. We have to protect confidentiality of the data, because some of this data is proprietary to the company selling us the car. Some of this data is sensitive and is proprietary for us. For example, our location trace is something that is highly sensitive and is not something we ideally want to share with the world. If we zoom more in on the machine learning models inside the car, of course, we want to make sure that nobody can tamper with those models, because that would result in a highly insecure car. And so in general, we want to prevent hacking of the car. We also want to prevent hacking of the sensors. So what you see is we create here a complex ecosystem, and all those aspects of the ecosystem, the communications, the computation, the storage, form the potential target of attack, where we can either try to extract data or try to modify data. And extracting data is bad for our privacy. Modifying data is even worse, because it will affect the safety of the owners of the car, the users of the car, but also of other people. So it's definitely clear that the target or the bar has been increased here. If we actually build autonomous vehicles, we will need higher level of security than what we have today in our tablets or laptops or smartphones. So if you look at one of the aspects of a car that could be attacked, typically is the decision making. So in the AI that decides whether the car should stop for a stop sign, or actually whether it should slow down, or whether it can go faster because there is a speed limit that disappears. And so, of course, one thing that a hacker could do is remotely take full control of the software of the car. And then, of course, you can affect any decision. You can control the car fully. This is not science fiction. Already in 2008, researchers have shown that they can, through the audio system of a car, they can remotely take over the whole car and disable the brakes and take control of anything in the car. So this is actually a realistic risk that can exist independent of AI. If we zoom in specifically on the AI, what one could do is provide malicious inputs to sensors and cameras. And you see an example of such malicious inputs here, besides some stop signs where some stickers are put on, and we'll come back to it right away. You can also go upstream in the process. One could actually manipulate the process while the decision machine in the car is being trained, or one could manipulate the training data, give false or mistaken training data to the car, so the car will take wrong decisions. Or something more of concern for car manufacturers, to build such models, to learn cars how to take smart decisions, you have to invest a lot of R&D, a lot of data and effort. And so, in fact, if one could hack the car, one could extract the model and actually steal the AI and build a much cheaper car, because the R&D and the investments have been made by somebody else. So if you look at the overall AI pipeline, so what you have a model. This is actually the core. What you do in a decision system is you build a model that takes some inputs and then outputs the decision. And so, of course, a direct target is the model itself, which we could try to steal. As I mentioned, if one can hack the system and copy the data, one has the full model, and one doesn't have to do all the R&D. We can steal the know-how. This can be done by copying all the data, or could also be done in a black box attack, which means that you don't have the data inside the system, but you give the system inputs, you observe the outputs, and from this you learn the model yourself. So just by observing inputs and outputs, one could also steal a model, and this is a particular trap. And on the left, we have the inputs. And so what the risk there is that one could use adversarial learning. One could actually apply very specific inputs that make the model go wrong. And I'll show you some examples of this on the next slide. This is pretty surprising research. And I think the research community is still regrouping how to properly deal with this. The second problem is that this input data is very often data of real users, pictures of real users, pictures of real streets. And so it turns out that actually, if you learn from this data, some of the user data, which can be private data, like your face or where you were, actually leaks in the model. So by examining the model, you may actually be able to find out which information was used to train the model. And so ideally, we want to protect our models against such leakage of training data. And finally, this model makes a decision. In the automotive sector, this is not very secret because the car will stop or turn or accelerate. But if you think of a model that learns about a medical decision, for example, does somebody have a certain disease or not, that can be highly sensitive information, and we may want to protect the output of a model. And sometimes we will even want to protect the output of a model and the inputs for the person owning the model or running the model. And we'll come back to that later as well, how this is possible. But so in general, AI is a complex pipeline where we have data in, we have a model and output, and all those aspects of a system can form the target of attack. So I will now give a brief example on adversarial learning, because that's a very exciting new area and very surprising new area that has started a couple of years ago with actually amazing results. So what you see on the left are some pictures of a bus, an animal, a tower, a dog, and so on. What you see in the middle is a bit of noise. So this is just some random zeros and ones at a very low level, so it's not very strong noise. What you see on the right is the noise in the middle added to the picture on the left. So the right picture is the noisy picture, the left picture is the original picture. Now, about 20 years ago, we started learning how to recognize objects in pictures. This was something that was not feasible before, but we have enough data available, enough computational power, and enough smart algorithms to actually recognize an object in the picture. And today, we're very good at this. For example, facial recognition, today computers are better at this than humans on average. But what was discovered 8 years ago is that if you do what I described here, so you take a picture and you add a low level of noise, you get a picture, in this case, that as a human still looks like a car, like a dog, like a tower. But actually all those pictures on the right to the computer, they look like an ostrich. So they're all recognized as a particular large bird. Even if as humans, of course, this noise doesn't disturb us and we still see the original dog and the original car. A more spectacular example is on the next slide. What you see here is a 3D turtle made with 3D printing, but it has a very special design in such a way that if you look at, as a computer looks at this with a specially trained model, it will not recognize a turtle, it will actually recognize a gun. And so it is actually pretty dangerous, because if we go back a few slides, I had the example of a stoplight, or a stop sign. It turns out that by putting a few simple circles on the stop sign, or stickers, as you see here, to a human eye, it still looks like a stop sign, but actually by putting those stickers in a strategic place, you can actually make this look to a computer as a speed limit of 120 kilometers per hour. So definitely, still some lessons to be learned. So I guess the good news is we made great progress in modeling knowledge, modeling decisions, and making computers smarter. On the other hand, we are still very vulnerable, they require protection. And I think one of the hot topics in research is how to protect against adversarial learning, how to protect against malicious input that are specifically crafted to defeat the system. So the stop sign is an example of a system that could happen in real life. Another one is somebody showed that you can actually change the lines, the painted lines on the road, for a Tesla to not recognize them as lines on the road. So the Tesla would actually go over the lines because the way they're made, they look to a human as normal lines, but to the Tesla AI, they actually look like there is no line or the line is elsewhere. So I think it's interesting to see we made great progress, but we still have a lot of challenges ahead to make these clever AI systems also safe and secure. What we can do is, of course, apply traditional security techniques. We know how to build secure systems. This is something we've been working on for 50 years. Technology is available. The question is mostly, do we have the budgets and the focus, expertise to actually invest in it? But we know how we can build secure systems. Important elements are authenticate everybody, every user, every device that connects to you should be authenticated, so you find out who they are. You should have authorization, which means that you should limit the rights of an entity to what they need to their job. So a sysadmin has to be able to change everything on a system, but a normal user does not have to be able to modify or encrypt systems files. So by having proper authorization, you can minimize damage to your system. Unfortunately, things go wrong. So if things go wrong, you want to have strong auditing capabilities, so where you can monitor what has happened. Ideally, you want, of course, also real-time intrusion detection and prevention, where you can intercept attacks in real time, but also you want, after the fact, be able to detect attacks so you can actually find out what happened and improve your defenses. And of course, very important, as my area of research, we want to use cryptography, encryption, and data authentication to actually make data unreadable and to make sure that any modification in data can be protected. If you look at software security, so we have a machine learning model that actually makes decisions. We have to give it training data, so we have to give it massive amounts of data and tell the machine learning model, these are stop signs, these are speed limit signs, these are traffic lights, and so on. So you have to actually give lots of data. This training data will be read by the training code and will be used to train the model. And once this model is being deployed, you have here the system in the car. Again, there is a machine learning model that will observe traffic signs, observe traffic lights, and so on. And it actually will be able to take decisions. Of course, on the system, you also have test code and test data. But in this case, the model is read-only, which means you test the operation of the system, but you will not actually change the model. Of course, what should not be possible is that, for example, training code should not get access to test data on a real car, or on the other hand, test code in a real car should not have access to training data that's used to train the model. So you have to clearly separate access using authentication, so you know which is a training system and which is a test system or a real system. You have to limit authorization, and you have to audit access. And you have to, of course, use encryption to protect the data. The second aspect to look at is privacy. So there has been quite some progress in privacy enhancing technologies. And so in general, we should try to make decisions based on minimal data. This goes a bit against this vision of big data, where you collect as much data as possible to take the best possible decisions. Actually, what GDPR tells us and privacy tells us is, well, try to collect minimal data. You can still do the task, but not more than this data. And if you have to put data together, if you have to create big data, if you have to put data in larger databases or make processing of larger quantities to make smart decisions, you should try to use anonymization, which meaning removing all identification information, or if that's not possible, pseudonymization, which means that at least without additional information, such as a key or extra site information, it's not possible to recover who the entity is. So these are very powerful tools. They never work perfectly, but they're a very important element to make sure we can reconcile big data on the one hand and AI to process data with privacy rights. Now, in my last few minutes, I want to talk about where research is going, but in fact, it's not only research, it's already being translated by several startups. So to actually enhance privacy and also safety of these AI systems, we have more and more technologies available that do something really magic, which is computing on encrypted data. So we have data which is encrypted, but in spite of this, we can actually still compute on them. And so there is a large range of technologies that have started to being developed 40 years ago conceptually. And the first realizations happened about 20 years ago. And in the last decade, those systems have become closer and closer to reality. So something we've been seeing appearing in the hardware space is trusted execution environments, which means that processor manufacturers like Intel and ARM build inside their computers a second smaller computer, which is completely isolated from the rest and actually processes data in a protected, controlled environment where the software is controlled and the data is controlled, so the general CPU and the other processors don't have access. But this has so far not become a great success, but it is widely being used. For example, in ARM we have TrustZone, in Intel we have SGX. And it was a bit of a surprise, by the way, that Intel announced recently that they will stop deploying SGX in future processors. I assume that they're working on some new technology, probably more sophisticated, but achieves the same goal to isolate processes from each other. So what you do there is using hardware to separate sensitive information from other information. Now one can also use cryptography, and this is on the left here what I call computing on encrypted data. And there is clever techniques. I will maybe show you a bit more about MPC and FHE. And also with zero knowledge, we can actually prove that what we do is correct. We prove certain things without actually leaking the details. That's a very important aspect of what we can do today. And on the right, I think what we can also do is statistics, is to actually design systems with privacy in mind using differential privacy, which means that by looking at the output, you can't tell whether a particular user was in the data or not, which means that the personal data of this user is protected. One can work with synthetic data. This way one can ensure that no data about particular individuals is being leaked. And one can also use federated machine learning, which is something where you do local learning enhanced by centralized learning. And this is something I showed in the car example, so where the car learns also locally, but then over time it also teaches some of the information it has learned, give it to a central system, and it's distributed over the other cars as well. So you have tuning of the algorithms at local level inside the car, but then once in a while, information is centralized, and then the global learning algorithm is improved, and this information is spread to everybody. So in the last couple of slides, I will show you an illustration of these technologies. So in general, today, technologies drive us to store everything inside the cloud to centralize more data. But as I showed, this is where data then gets leaked and by the hundreds of millions of users. So what we could do is actually keep information local and do local computations on it. So in this case, in federated learning, we actually learn locally and we take local decisions, and only aggregate information once in a while gets shared with the centralized system. And this way we have a better performance and we also have better privacy. Something we can do with cryptography, which is really like magic, is we can spread information over multiple computers. And this can be smaller devices like IoT devices or bigger servers like cloud services. And the assumption here is that parties will not collude, so the parties will not share all their information. So everybody has their own sensitive data, which could be your medical data or the location of your car or the parameters of your car. Multi-party computation allows to exchange a lot of data in encrypted form, and in the end, compute on this data without leaking data itself, which is very interesting. And secondly, you can also show that the result is correct. So this is amazing because it means that you don't have to bring your data into the cloud, you don't have to expose it, but you can still extract value. And then another technique, which is complementary to MPC, is fully homomorphic encryption. What you do there is you bring your data in the cloud, but in encrypted form. And what you then do is you compute on the encrypted data, and then you output the data, again in encrypted form, to somebody else who can decrypt and then get the result. So as an example, you want for an analysis of your medical data. So you made ECGs and all kinds of other medical data. You upload it in encrypted form to a server. The server does a computation on this, decides what your risk is for certain diseases, and output you the results in encrypted form, so only you can see the results. So nobody ever gets access to your medical data, but still it's possible to do computations on your data. So a brief comparison of this. So trusted servers actually are very fast and have a very low overhead, but you have to trust the hardware, and there are quite some challenges. Some of those have been hacked in the past. MPC in the middle has a problem. It has a very high communication overhead. So this is where the bottom line is here. The challenge in the service is in the trust. MPC, the challenge is in the communication overhead. FHE, the challenge is in the computation overhead. In general, for many problems, we can use any of those techniques or combination to solve the problems. I'll skip the example of the fast energy and we just wrap up. I just want to point out that these technologies are not science fiction anymore. There is actually dozens of companies, both startups and larger companies, and also our research group is very active in this space, that actually develop solutions based on MPC or FHE to solve real-life problems. So time to wrap up. So AI is a fantastic benefit and can really create value out of data. But if we do this, we actually have to make sure that the AI systems and the data in those systems have adequate protection. And for those things, we have two options. We can, of course, use traditional security principles like access control, authorization. But also there is some magic technologies, some advanced technologies that allow us to compute on encrypted data and get value out of data without actually revealing it. And so the good news is that this is something that was conceived in the 80s, demonstrated in the 90s, and it has become more and more efficient. And in the 2020s, I think this will be practical. And hopefully by the end of this decade, we can roll this out on a large scale. And so I hope that this is contribution cryptographers can bring to this decade if we can make sure that we can get value out of AI without having the privacy and security risks. Thank you very much for your attention. And now it's my pleasure to hand over to Dr. Melanie Ryback, who's the co-founder and CEO of Radically Open Security. Seems to be a small technical problem, but I'm sure this will be resolved very quickly.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Oh. Okay.
Okay, good, excellent. So yeah, so thank you so much for inviting me. And yeah, I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm Melanie Ryback from Radically Open Security. I'm a former assistant professor of computer science at the Free University of Amsterdam, and I now run a penetration testing company of roughly 50 people. So we have, really quite a wide variety of customers, everything from Google to Mozilla to the European Commission to Dutch government, energy grids, but also we do a lot of not-for-profit work at cost price for nonprofits, NGOs, and civil society. The weird thing about Radically Open Security is that not just are we a social enterprise, but we're actually what I would call a not-for-profit company. And what this means is we give basically all of our non-reinvested profits to charity. The charity that we support is called the NLNet Foundation, and NLNet supports open source projects, digital rights initiatives, and basically everything for a better, open, and transparent internet. In the first 7 years of my company's existence, we have donated almost €750,000 to NLNet, and we're super happy that this has been redistributed to projects like GNU, Tor, EFF, Jitsi, DNSSEC, WireGuard, and all kinds of sort of usual suspects, I would say. And we're really proud to be doing this. Of course, one would also ask the question of why, right? Quite simply, look, I used to be an academic, and academics unlike most of the world of business, we measure our success in terms of positive impact. So, I basically took that same mindset from academia and really translated it to, the commercial industry. And really, the way that I measure my success indeed is sort of how much good we can do as a company and how much we can cross-subsidize charity. And we've also made use of some other mechanisms to ensure that our company remains not-for-profit, including 100% ownership by a foundation, as well as the use of some boards to prevent eventual sale of our company. Now, this kind of stuff is weird because most of the time, if you are a professor at a university and you have some great research that you did and you want to valorize this research, of course, what's usually going to happen is you're going to go to the technology transfer office, right? And this TTO, they're going to probably push you to the incubator that's affiliated with your university. And the first thing that incubator is going to do is, first of all, give you a PowerPoint slide with a picture of an exponential curve on it. We were talking about hockey sticks before. And the second thing that they're going to do is give you some introductions to some venture capitalists. Now, this is not really helpful. And I can tell you why. There's a really nice economist. Her name is Mariana Mazzucato, and she wrote a book that's called The Entrepreneurial State. The point that she makes in the book is that the government is the world's largest venture capitalist. If you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because, all of this great academic research that's going on, of course, all of this is government funded and also being paid for by taxpayer dollars. But the problem that we're having right now as a society is that we are socializing the costs of this research, but then we are privatizing the benefits. See, the moment that a venture capitalist gets involved, the problem here is that, first of all, it's going to wind up closing the technology again. The first thing that they're going to do, most likely, and also the direction the TTO will push you in, is to file a patent. And there's a problem with this, of course, because with publicly funded research, the moment that you put a patent on this, what you're doing is you're actually putting a barrier to entry for other people in using your technology. Because who really wants to use patented technology? We see this all the time, for example, in standards committees, where different parties come in and try and make their contributions. But of course, the moment somebody's trying to push their own patented technology into the agenda, of course, people start running the other direction. So, this kind of stuff is pervasive, and it's also a bit complicated. The second thing also is just that these venture capitalists, what's going to actually happen with your company is they are going to try and get your company groomed for an exit. In other words, the exit is your definition of success as a cybersecurity company. You want your company to be sold to Google or Amazon or Facebook, or, you don't really care, actually, who's going to be buying you. But the main point is you want to grow and get this really large valuation to get to that point where you can cash your company out. There's a few problems with this. First of all, if you think about this, we're using public money now to fund these cybersecurity companies. I can give you an interesting example from the Netherlands. Our market leader, I don't feel like naming them, but one of our market leaders, they built these monitoring black boxes, right? And these monitoring boxes were in all parts of the government. They were all throughout Dutch big business. They were in the military. They were everywhere. The problem was this company then, at a certain point, got acquired by a larger British cybersecurity company. The entire Dutch government let out a collective, oh crap, all of our data now is going to the British. And they immediately jumped ship, from using these monitoring boxes. There was another small startup who I'm also not going to name, but they basically spun out of this original company. But of course, as usual, they got funding, they grew exponentially. 2 years later, I read a press release in the newspaper. Congratulations, this other startup just got acquired by the Romanians. Crap. When are we going to learn? So what we don't often think about as cybersecurity professionals starting a company is that exiting is actually a governance nightmare for our customers, particularly if we're selling to customers outside of the EU. And again, if we're starting to think about all of this stuff that is government funded, the governments themselves, and I know that many of you, by the way, are in Brussels, so these kinds of issues are very relevant to you, but you might want to start thinking about what kind of companies you are cultivating and the ways in which you're incubating them. Because if you were to take unconventional measures with your company, for example, to use a tool called steward ownership. See, steward ownership is a really interesting construction in that, either you sell your company to 100% to a foundation. That's actually what I did with Radically Open Security. Or second of all, you have something called a golden share, which is basically a poison pill that you can give to a foundation that prevents the sale of your company. See, if you are going to fund a company that is actually meant to serve the constituency of the country that you're starting in, then why not force these kinds of conditions onto the company to ensure that whatever Dutch company, Belgian company, whatever it is, that to make sure that it actually stays Dutch or Belgian, right? So, most people don't really think about things from this angle, but from actually having run a company for long enough, I start getting confronted with these kinds of stories and situations all the time. Not to mention when going through incubation for my own company, I just discovered that the whole system really doesn't make sense. The other thing also is that I think that the whole game of venture capital is a distraction from actually doing security. That might sound incredibly weird, but actually the whole game most of the time of starting these companies is to get a small funding round, then to get a slightly larger funding round, and so forth until either we can IPO or sell. But the problem, though, is that getting all this funding is incredibly labor intensive. Most people don't think about this, but for example, it's the same thing as being an academic going for grant proposals. The amount of effort that you actually put into getting subsidies as an academic, that's almost an equal amount of time and effort that you put into cultivating this venture capital. The second thing also is that, let's say you get the capital, it prevents you from actually having a business model that allows you to be self-sustaining in the first place. And the problem is, if we think about our role models in the cybersecurity industry, if we think about our heroes, unfortunately, we start to look at companies like Palantir. Besides the obvious ethical problems, that associated with Palantir, an even larger problem really is just that they are losing money like crazy. When Palantir had filed for their IPO paperwork, they were making losses of over 500 million on a revenue of roughly 750 million. And also when they broke down their budget, they were putting more money into marketing and PR than actually into research and development. What you really start understanding is that all of this commercial involvement and steering is getting us really far away from the services that we are supposed to be providing for society. Yeah. So, of course, the question otherwise is, how can I do this differently? And of course, quite simply, I would say, stay away from the venture capitalists. I mean, it's not that hard, actually, to bootstrap a cybersecurity company. As particularly if you start with services, you just create a platform company. It's the same thing with my pen testing company. Basically, you match a producer to a consumer. The producer is my pen testers and the consumer are my customers. That generates a cash flow, and then the margin on that cash flow can be reinvested into research and development of products. That's precisely how we developed our pen test system, which is an open source pen test reporting and workflow framework that not only have we fully open sourced it, but we made it an OWASP project. So the reason why we can do this is, quite frankly, because there are no investors to tell me not to. It's precisely the same reason also why I can use my company as an activistic vehicle to cross-subsidize charity, once again, because there's no investors to tell me not to. But there's not enough places where you can go as a cybersecurity founder to get this kind of mentoring. And to get this kind of guidance and to really understand that these kinds of possibilities are within, this is all within the realm of possibility. So similarly also with academics, what we also don't understand is that we are caught in something that is called the subsidy trap. Let me explain. So I'm sure you all have heard before of the poverty trap, right? So you've got this poor person who's living on welfare. And the problem is that if they do something to improve their situation, in other words, if they want to get a job or if they want to start a company, the problem is once they start earning a sufficient amount, they lose their welfare. Now, it's the same thing actually with academics because you get subsidy, of course, from the government. And the problem is that the moment that you would want to do something to make your research more self-sustaining, like adding commercial activity, that's the moment when you need to start talking to the TTO, and they will push, most likely, something under your nose saying that they want to own, N% of like whatever company you ever start ever, and they start patenting everything. Trust me, I know this because back when I was working at the Free University of Amsterdam and I wanted to valorize my RFID security research, this is exactly what I had to deal with. I looked at the paperwork that they pushed under my nose and I said, I'm not signing this, and gave it back to them. And thank goodness I did, because if I had signed it, I would have never been able to create my company in the way that I did today. But we're not alone, as academics in falling into this subsidy trap. Another party that really suffers under this is open source projects. Open source projects also receive subsidies and different kinds of funding. And what winds up happening is you get this project developer, this open source project developer, and he or she is developing this thing, and it's awesome, right? It's really, really great. And then, at a certain point, the subsidy starts running out, and they're like, oh, crap. Maybe I actually need to find a customer for this, because this subsidy. So basically, at that point, they start running around like crazy, like a chicken without a head, looking for customers. But the problem is, once you've got a hammer, basically you're limited to finding nails, and that's sort of not the right time really to start thinking about value proposition and market fit. You need to actually start thinking about these things at an earlier stage. But the problem is, though, if you go to these open source founders and say, hi, I want to help you start a company, they're going to look at you and they're going to be like, well, nah, business is evil, not interested. Which also leaves them in that position that they are dependent and they're vulnerable. But the problem is that, again, if they want to get that business education to make the open source project self-sustaining, the only place that they have to go is these commercial incubators. And this, again, is going to push them into the wrong direction. This is not what we need. So really what we need is incubators that can provide non-commercial and completely not-for-profit incubation advice that can really promote more nonprofit entity forms, and charitable and activistic business models. There is a huge pain for this, I can tell you. And also beyond radically open security, 4 years ago, I also started another company called Nonprofit Ventures, which is exactly this. It's a startup incubator that teaches founders how to create not-for-profit business models that cross-subsidize charity. I've already run 3 different cohorts through the program of roughly a dozen founders. And more importantly, we are rethinking how we can actually handle incubation. I've put a lot of resources out there on our website. It's called postgrowthentrepreneurship.com. And also all of my videos, all of everything that I'm working on, I also release, of course, for free as open source, because quite simply, I think this stuff is too important, to be commercialized, and it's the same thing with cybersecurity, right? Same thing with asking questions about ethical AI. About a month ago, not 2 months ago, probably, I gave a talk at the what we call the Eerste Kamer, the first chamber of parliament, the Senate in the Netherlands. And I was there to essentially explain to them what's going wrong with Facebook. It just so happened that this hearing was on the same day that Frances Haugen was testifying in the Senate against Facebook. So, I was the second speaker of the day. Katelijn Jonker gave a really nice first presentation, really covering the basics of AI and privacy. And then I sort of came in there and said, look, I've been working for almost 20 years as a security professional, right? And I've spent huge portions of that career developing privacy enhancing technologies. Whether we're talking, firewall devices, fuzzers, pen testing, pets, just, VPN devices. I mean, like I've done all of it. But at the end of the day, I started feeling really frustrated because what I realized at a certain point is that I was putting technology band-aids on essentially what's business model problems. See, Facebook, they treat our data like the new oil, precisely because that is what their business models tell us that it is, right? And it's not that Facebook doesn't have the internal capabilities to do better. I mean, Frances Haugen herself was an algorithms expert. It's not that they don't have the technological know-how in-house to develop privacy-preserving algorithms, to know how to open the black box of machine learning, to be able to, develop adequate privacy, pseudo-anonymization, data retention. If they want to, they can do all this. But the problem here is not a lack of technology. The problem is a lack of will. And this is the problem. And this is why they prioritize algorithms, that will, promote so-called, meaningful social interactions, AKA, really promoting the most divisive, controversial, hateful content. It's not because they can't do better, but it's just quite simply because that is their revenue model. And these technologists, if it starts getting so bad internally that the only route that they see to solve this problem is to take a huge stack of documents and walk to the Wall Street Journal, something's wrong. So the problem here isn't necessarily that we haven't developed enough new technologies, to solve this issue, but the problem rather is that there are these super voting constructions that make Mark Zuckerberg untouchable. They've got basically an A-class and B-class share scheme. Mark Zuckerberg's vote is worth 10 votes to any person like you and me who were to buy a share of stock in Facebook. At one point, an activist investor, Trion Asset Management, they attempted to change this to actually make it one share, one vote. But Mark Zuckerberg, who owns 35% of the shares but has 65% of the vote, wonder of wonders, he single-handedly voted this proposal down. So this is really the problem. These companies are not accountable to anybody, not even to the shareholders. So, and this is then the reason why we start getting these companies that are completely running amok. And really the only way I think that we can solve this problem is either to regulate them, because of course at this point, we can start looking at anti-monopoly legislation. And the second thing is, to try and create a so-called competing commercial ecosystem to try and compete them out of business. But of course, from their current position, that's not easy to do. And the problem also is that the people who are trying to compete Facebook out of existence are taking exactly the same strategy. I mean, essentially what they're doing is they're also trying to get a big pot of money to start out with, whether it's crowdfunding or a Kickstarter or whatever. And they just assume, we're going to try and get as many users as quickly as possible to build a critical mass that we can get the network effects that we then can, survive and eventually be able to displace Facebook. But the problem is, all these different initiatives, the diasporas, the mastodons, the open book, none of these are succeeding. And the reason why is just quite simply because we cannot beat Facebook at its own game. They're just too big. And there's no way that we can have a long enough runway, with an initial pot of capital to make that survive. Now, I believe that the answer to this is distribution. We talk about distributed systems in computer networks and computer science, but I think we also need to consider rather, in the yeah, in the business ecosystem and startup ecosystem, the power of distributed networks as well. There's another economist, her name is Kate Raworth, and she has a really interesting, well, she says a lot of great things, but she has this one little thing, and it's like this little toy. And basically, it's like this little tiny globe. And then what she does is she sort of pulls it out, and then you get this really big, bunch of interconnected networks. Now, here's the thing. If you take small units that have integrity, and then you interconnect them, you can build things that are complex, sublime, and beautiful. In fact, this is the basis of the entire internet as a whole. So if we want to fight Facebook, we're not going to fight it by trying to build another behemoth. Just by the nature of trying to replicate that, it's going to be problematic. But rather, what we actually need to do is we need to start creating smaller, not-for-profit entities, and then essentially building an ecosystem from the bottom up, rather than trying to architect the whole thing from the top down. It's the difference between trying to create fair supply chains with a fair phone, because of course there's like 400 components in a smartphone, and it's really hard to get all 400 suppliers to become fair, versus trying to create something like, say, a smart diode, which might be something a little bit closer if you happen to have a semiconductor factory, but it could be a little bit closer. And then once you would have that fair diode, then you can now create 1/400th of a fair phone, but then all 1/10 of a fair bike light and 1/100th of a fair Fitbit and whatever. And that's the point. We need to start thinking from the bottom up, from the grassroots, from the community level. And this is something that all of us as individuals can do. So anyhow, I hope that this has been thought-provoking. It's a little bit different, of course, than the other two talks. And I and also the rest of the speakers, we are very happy to take questions. So thank you for listening. I believe we have questions now.
Yes, thank you, Melanie, and also thank you to Bart and Rosanna, of course. It's no time for questions. We have a short time for questions since we have 8 minutes before we have to close it. So I will only ask one question to each presenter. And the first one is actually going to Rosanna. And it's a question that is often coming in our area. The question says, a lot of SMEs in Belgium have no expertise in cybersecurity. Who can a SME contact to perform a diagnostic of the situation and to have help in the action plan establishment?
So I would... there are a lot of competencies in Belgium. My first place that I would go to would be the Cybersecurity Center of Belgium. That's a government-run agency, so that's one source. Another source that you could go to, which I really believe in, is the Cybersecurity Coalition of Belgium, which is like it's a partnership of academic institutions, public sector, and private sector, and they have a lot of expertise. They share the knowledge and they try to, coordinate so that there's knowledge and skill sharing. So I would do as an SME is to go to cybersecuritycoalition.be and check out their activities and try to reach out to them.
Okay, thank you very much. I see that our participants are still a bit shy on asking questions, but it's totally normal. So the second question will be actually for Melanie, and it's about what you said about TTO. What you said about TTO is clearly something that we experiment in Europe. We would like to know if the situation would be different in North America.
Well, I think that the situation is probably a bit harder to fix in the US, quite simply because I think in general, and this is what I've noticed from being in the Netherlands, we're an extremely social capitalistic society here in Europe. We already have a well-developed set of social safety nets. So I think if you come in with sort of somewhat unconventional but social ideas, you actually find a lot of support, even up to the highest levels. That's certainly been my experience in the Netherlands. And of course, as a no-brainer in the city of Amsterdam, where I live, I mean, they thrive on weird. So I'm kind of lucky to be located here. Yeah, the main thing is, though, in the US, I think it's a bit more complicated because I think that half of the people you talk to are immediately going to turn off because it's so far, culturally speaking, from the way things are there. I think the other half of the people are extremely discontented about the situation right now. And even if you go to, the homeland of the Silicon Valley model, if you go and talk with, people at Stanford, you will find a surprising amount of sympathy for these ideas because they did create the problem. But I think they also realize that it is a problem. If you go to San Francisco and look around, there's enough homelessness. They realize by now that people are throwing rocks at the Google bus and something needs to change. So, they are, I think, surprisingly open-minded also in considering the solutions. But the problem is you really need to start with the early adopters on this one because most people really haven't even thought about these kinds of non-conventional business ideas in any amount of detail. So it's not necessarily a lack of will, that we have to overcome, but it's actually just a lack of knowledge. So I believe that really we just have a large cultural problem before our hands, and it's really a matter of talking to everyone who will listen, particularly speaking first with our choir members who agree with us, because we, the choir, we can provide the role models, the community, case studies, examples that others can study. And it's typical crossing the chasm. You start with the early adopters, and eventually you have to cross the chasm into the mainstream. The laggards won't come until later. So the only way I think that really we can make this kind of a change is by starting with those who already agree with us, demonstrating it, proving it, and then eventually everyone else will start coming along quite simply because they will see that it's a validated good idea and they don't want to be left behind.
Okay. Thank you very much, Melanie. To be honest, we don't have much question left, especially for Bart. But what is really funny and interesting is that Bart has some question for the other presenter, and I think that it's good that us academic we have questions for you because it's opening our view of the world. And Bart had a question for Rosanna. It is what is your view about cybersecurity certification?
So there's a lot of different views on cybersecurity certification, and I would say there's not one correct one. There's a lot of right ways, a lot of ways to look at it, depending on where you're coming from. So me personally, I'm coming from, my advocacy is to help career pivots into cybersecurity and bring these transferable skills into the industry. So bringing other skills other than just the technology skills into, but everybody has to learn technology on top of what they need to. So what they can bring from where they're coming from. So from my perspective, which is, like I say, it's a perspective of a certain demographic, is that certifications have a really, really good use because it certifies that people are motivated to learn, even people coming from an IT background, that they're willing to do the job and the work of actually learning the basics of computer networking fundamentals, for example. And so it's a good way to enter for people with non-typical or atypical profiles. So from this perspective, I think it's useful. From other perspectives, then we can argue and discuss. But for the perspective that I'm saying, the profiles that I'm trying to help to get into the industry, it's very helpful.
Thank you very much, and also thank you to Nick, one of the participants who has a question for Bart, and we still have 2 minutes, so I think we can ask this question to Bart. The question is, computing on encrypted data does look very interesting, but would you feel comfortable with your own health data being processed with FHSE, for example? So to me, it feels like the data will then be out in the open with less controls than we have currently, with potential undiscovered bug weakness in the encryption. So basically, I think it's related to the power of FHE, Bart. So if you'd like to say something about this.
That's a very good question. Definitely, of course, as a security paranoid person, I would like to check the code and check the systems and check how it's being operated. So I would be very paranoid, but I think look at what we do today, right? I mean, you say we have a lot of control, but I mean, maybe if our data is in the Belgian e-health system, there is some controls there, but if your data is in an app, where does it go? And how many other players get access to this data? So, I mean, many people now have smartwatches that actually collect health data, and this health data, we don't know where it goes. It goes to the owner of the smartwatch, I mean, the company owning the smartwatch, but maybe also the advertising companies they contract with. I mean, what is in their apps? You don't even know. So in that sense, I believe that I would prefer that I encrypt the data in my smartwatch and then I send it somewhere. They can still do computations which are not legitimate, but if it's encrypted with a key, I can only decrypt. I'm the only one who can see the results. Yes, I think there is assurance questions and long-term security questions, but I think they're much less of a concern to me than the current ecosystem where more or less you have GDPR protecting you pro forma, but de facto you have no idea where your data goes, especially if you're in the ecosystem.
Thank you, Bart. So we are now out of time. So thank you to Bart and to the two other speakers, and also thank you to Desiree and Xavier for organizing this. And goodbye, everybody. That's over.
Thank you.